Hello everyone, this is Nathan Lindorf with The Rational Independent. Welcome to today's controversy. We once again are going after the wealthy because they're like terrible or something. Headline: the IRS could recover $12 for every $1 spent on scrutinizing the ultra-wealthy's taxes. If that's really true, then why aren't they doing it? So ask yourself the question. They're not doing that. They're not doing that because maybe the situation is a little more complex. Let's see. First, in one of the opening paragraphs, we have a quote: "The findings illustrate how much money might be sitting untapped in what the IRS calls the tax gap, the chasm between taxes owed and taxes paid. America's highest earners are especially adept at not paying their taxes." This type of comment, this type of reasoning is infuriating because it implies that America's wealthy are committing tax evasion. Tax evasion is a federal crime. You go to prison for it. Just ask Al Capone. That's not a surprise. There's a whole other separate category of behavior called tax avoidance, where you utilize legal loopholes in order to reduce your taxable burden. Have you ever made a charitable contribution, saved that receipt, applied it to your taxes? You just reduced your taxable income using a legal means. You filed with a deduction. You deducted the total amount of income that you had by the amount of your charitable contribution, and that reduced your taxable burden. Congratulations, you've just committed tax avoidance, not tax evasion. So infuriating. Next quote: "It also means that the public services that we all depend on are underfunded, so we have less revenue to pay for healthcare and education, higher education and infrastructure, and all of the things that our tax dollars support that enable us to have strong communities." Government doesn't build strong communities. When public funding gets involved, it screws up the local marketplace. Setting aside the issue of the government's role in strengthening or weakening communities, let's just look at one piece. The argument could be made that each of these sectors that he's talked about are as screwed up as they are because of the amount of public funding that they get. Public funding is guaranteed dollars from a third party, which means that because they're guaranteed, they don't respond to market incentives. Because it's a third party, that third party doesn't care whether it works or it doesn't work, not in any kind of real objective sense, not in the way that a small business needs to meet the needs of its community or it goes bankrupt. You have perverse incentives that are introduced into these sectors by public funding, necessarily, because you have money coming into a system that does not respond to market incentives. So instead, the market begins to twist itself to respond to the flow of funds from this third party and whatever they're interested in, which is not whatever the local market is interested in. By definition, it's a third-party payer. Now, here's the interesting thing. When you pervert a marketplace, when you create perverse incentives, you create a situation where the funding comes in and it twists things up. And when it twists things up, guess what? Outcomes go down. The benefits that the society gets from that sector are reduced because you get increased corruption, increased graft, lower efficiency, lower care for the community, lower motivation for market participants because they don't have to care. They have a guaranteed flow of dollars. Now, the sector's performing worse, and the politicians that are in charge of channeling these big flows of public funding they point to those poor outcomes and say, look at these poor outcomes, we need more public funds, which just further perverts the incentives within that sector and reduces the outcomes that come from it. This is a tale as old as Lyndon Johnson's Great Society, and certainly before then. When you throw government money at something, it almost universally destroys it. And I only say almost universally because I believe in allowing, hypothetically, there could be something. I don't want to rule it out completely. But in my experience, basically, you can guarantee the destruction of the thing that you're throwing money at. And I'll give you another example that might move you away from any predisposition you have when it comes to government being the source of funds. Have you ever known a wealthy family with a troublesome child? With a child that perhaps has a susceptibility to a sex addiction, a drug addiction, to some kind of other misbehavior, to reckless behavior, to poor impulse control. That child, if they are given access to a trust fund, if they're given access to essentially unlimited money that doesn't fluctuate based on their own behavior, it doesn't help that child. It destroys them. It twists them up. And what's worse, it attracts the worst kind of people to them. I will give you an example. I had an aunt who unfortunately had some mental challenges through the years. I won't get into details. It's not, it's her story. It's not mine. But it's one of the reasons you'll hear me speak passionately about mental illness, because I have it in my family. And her father, my grandfather, was very wealthy. And so she received certain amounts of inheritance. She was vulnerable to people who would take advantage of her for that. And she would buy people houses, and she would fund their startup businesses. And she would the money would just flow right out of her fingers. And instead of taking care of his daughter, the funds were actually reducing her quality of life. They were actually undermining her ability to live a stable, healthy life. So what he did is he ended up locking away the majority of her inheritance and skipped a generation, set it up to give it to her daughters on her death instead. Now, no one wants to do that to their child, but sometimes you have to make a hard choice in order to protect a child. In a similar way, society needs to look at these sectors that are challenged, these things that are important to us, healthcare, education, and recognize that throwing public funding at these things might just make it worse, not better. Let's actually analyze it from that perspective, and you might be surprised what you find. I will give them the last word. This is their closing paragraph. Republicans insisted on cutting that IRS funding, which makes no sense. It's going to reduce our revenue, and it's actually going to increase the deficit by close to $20 billion. Parentheses. By the way, that's barely a rounding error in the federal budget, but let's go on. Because we won't collect taxes that are actually owed, that we know are owed. So it's really puzzling to me. Are they in favor of breaking the law? Because that's what it seems like. It really seems like they're making the case that tax avoidance is tax evasion. These are not the same thing. One of these things is legal, the other one sends you to federal prison. To review, let me simply put it this way. Wealth is created when private actors take a risk to try and meet a genuine market need. And both parties are enriched because market participants that need that good or service receive it from the person who's now producing it for less than it would cost for them to produce themselves. Therefore, they have more money left over to spend on other things. And the person providing the good or service is enriched because they now have a source of income and a stable ability to improve the lives around them. The American economy is built on this truth. We are a victim of our own wealth because we have so much money sloshing around, so much wealth. We have so much buffer between us and starvation that we have lost the ability to discriminate between what money makes things better and what money makes things worse. And people who allow their emotions to drive their decision-making when it comes to money usually end up broke. And the people who allow purely their brains, purely their logic, well, they usually end up being cruel and miserly, as is often the case. We need a balance of both of these inputs. You'll notice there's one reason why, while I personally lean right, I am someone on the right who is willing to own the fact that for a healthy society, we need the right and the left. A lot of people that I listen to on the right basically say, the right is virtuous and the left is evil. A lot of people I listen to on the left say, the left is virtuous, the right is evil. Sorry, I'm politically homeless in the middle. I have my own personal convictions. I have my own personal opinions and things that I will advocate for. But I start from the premise that society needs a mix of inputs from both the left and the right. And that's where I'm going to leave my Reddit rant for today. Good luck out there.